Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Purpose Tune podcast. The goal of my show is to create valuable content to broaden your knowledge, hopefully to inspire you to act and get you in the right mindset so you can apply it in your own life to drive impact, generate meaning, and achieve your purpose. Now, today's guest is Asha Wilkerson. She is an attorney, educator, and speaker who equips emerging leaders with the tools they need to make a difference in their lives and in the world around them. When colleges and universities want to show their student leaders how to develop into agents of change, she is the one that they turn to. Her legal career has been centered on human rights with a focus on assisting in the empowerment of underserved communities in countries such as Costa Rica, the Netherlands, Haiti, and Cuba. While running her own practice, she was recognized by Super Lawyers magazine as a Northern California rising star for 6 consecutive years. Impressive. And she was honored by the Wiley Manual Bar Association as Attorney of the Year in 2019 and by the Sacramento chapter of the National Lawyers with a Social Justice Award in 2020. So, Asha, thank you for joining me today. How are you doing?
Great. I am fantastic. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm very excited. So let's dive into your work. How did you begin your career in the legal field, and how did that
Yeah.
with human rights and so on?
Yeah. Okay. So, there's some folks who have always known their whole lives that they wanted to be an attorney. I was not that person. I was not sure that I wanted to be an attorney probably until like the day before I actually stepped into a law school classroom, which is so, not the typical story, but I really I used to love Law and Order, but I wanted to be that forensic psychologist on Law and Order, Dr. Wong. And I just love to know how people moved and why they did the things that they did. I wanted to understand the psychology behind people, but I ended up going to law school because I thought, okay, psychology I probably won't do. So I'm going to be a high school English teacher. And then I was just in the right place at the right time where the dean of admissions for Santa Clara's Law School came to one of our Black Student Union meetings and said, hey, we've got a pre-law program for you guys this summer. It'll pay you. And I was supposed to go home to Portland and work at the Boys and Girls Club. And something happened with their funding. So my job got cut. I'd learned about this opportunity. I thought, okay, let me apply and see what happens. That's always my motto, just apply and see what happens. So I applied for the summer after my sophomore year, enjoyed the classes, met some judges, went to some nonprofits. I thought, okay, this is interesting, but I'm not sure. I think I still want to be a teacher. And I went back the next year as a counselor. And then again, I decided, let me just apply and see what happens. They covered LSAT prep for us. We had some support on applications, and I got into UC Hastings Law School, and it was early decision, which meant that if I got in, I'd committed to going. So by Thanksgiving, the year before I started law school, I knew that I had this seat here, and I thought, well, I get, it looks like everything has just aligned. So maybe this is the path that I should take. And I ultimately decided on it because teaching is a noble profession, and I teach again now, but I thought that maybe law would give me the best sort of basis to be able to help people in as many different ways as possible. So whether that's representing folks in court, writing policy or legislation, advocating or negotiating with someone, for a contract, I feel like I could do almost whatever I wanted to with a legal background. Whereas if I got my master's in teaching, I would be, stuck to a classroom. And at least that's what I thought at the time. So I feel like I kind of fell into law as much as you can accidentally fall into law. Like that's sort of what happened to me.
Did you had any guidance from your counselor or mentor that helped you thought through this process, or was it just like an innate calling that you felt like this is what you were meant to do?
Yeah, so not on the legal side, but I will say that I went to a Catholic, Jesuit Catholic high school that was really big on community service. which is always, as an adult, I look back, because there's all this stuff with the Catholic Church, and it's been a very big mover in social justice, but then on the other hand can be really oppressive. So I experienced both as a high school kid. Like, we had a uniform, shorts had to be a certain length and all that stuff, but they also really drilled into us being men and women for others and really serving the community. And my mom was an educator, and so she was always, working with children. I think I got my love of that from her, and also from my auntie, who was an educator. But in high school, we had to do a week of community service, or at least like that many hours worth of community service before graduating. We were always having cleanup days, food drives, things like that. I went to a Jesuit Catholic college, also Santa Clara University, and got immediately involved in like the community action program there, and ran a program that was working with kids whose parents had been incarcerated. I did it because I really liked working with kids, and the extension, like the population that I ended up being placed with was kids who had parents who were incarcerated. So that is social justice kind of work, but it was really just my love of being with children and helping the community that sparked that. And then I ended up getting into human rights because I graduated college. I finished my requirements for college a quarter early. And I had the opportunity to go to Cuba, which really started, I traveled a little bit before that, but that really started my love affair with traveling and seeing the world and seeing how people could live a completely different lifestyle than what it is in the United States. And still people are okay. I mean, situation dependent, right? But it really taught me that there isn't just one way to do things. And I wanted to open up my world. And so then I got into a study abroad program in law school, worked in Costa Rica, working with the United Nations High Commissioner on Refugees, resettling Colombian refugees. So they had been refugees in Costa Rica, and then were still experiencing persecution. So I helped to find different resettlement locations for them to another country, then went to the Netherlands on another study abroad opportunity, worked for the UN again, but this time the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. And I think it was really my tie of traveling, meeting people from different places, and seeing how I could not come with like that colonizer mentality that happens when you come from the US. Even though I am a minority in the US, I come from the US, right? So everything that we are taught is that we are going to go and help people, but I was really going to learn from people and to see, to make my footprint as green as possible. Like, let me help make sure that my experience is enjoyable for all of us, instead of me just coming in as like this person that knows what to do, because I didn't know what to do. I was only 22, right? 23, 24, right? So I didn't know anything. So that's a long-winded answer of how I got into social justice and community service and things like that.
No, I mean, I love that. Thank you for sharing. I have a minor in social justice, so I know how that work is. Of course, there's a lot of companies that are focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I want to pick your brain on that particular subject as it relates to how companies can foster more inclusive environments. Of course, there's no single answer that works, because every organization is different, its culture is different. And so me as an HR practitioner and DI specialist, I know that work is oftentimes challenging. So
yes,
you being the Bay Area, I'm sure you've come across leaders who are trying to foster more inclusive cultures, or speaking to people who are actually doing the work of helping organizations build more inclusive environments. What's your take on all of this?
Yeah. So I get these questions pretty frequently. And I think also just because, I'm a minority of a minority, I'm a woman and I'm a Black woman. And then I'm an attorney that just doesn't, have very much representation of people of color, period. Right. So what I have noticed though, is that culture really comes from the top down. So talking to folks in the tech industry, And I think it's like tech companies' favorite game to say, well, we're trying to increase our diversity, but there just aren't enough candidates, right?
Mhm.
And then you ask further questions, you go, well, what schools are you looking at? And they're looking at the same, top 5 schools. And students may not, folks of color or diverse students may not go there for a number of reasons that don't have anything to do with aptitude and capacity, right? And maybe because maybe they got a full scholarship at a school that's closer to home, or maybe there's a family obligation, and so being closer to family was more important, or maybe a number of reasons, right, that don't have anything to do with talent and skill. So when I look at companies that are paying lip service but they're not actually changing their actions, then it's just a waste of time, right? So back to the original thing I said is that company culture changes from the top down. It's the onus is put on us a lot of times as employees to do the work, because we want to see a change in our lives and our sense of belonging in the companies. But if the higher ups aren't doing it, and if it's not changing the culture, then it's going to be the same thing. Then we're just continuously knocking at the door, right? So what does that mean? I think, and really that means like we need a mindset shift. Instead of looking at folks and saying, well, you're different, let's see if you fit here, let's look at folks and say, what is the culture add that you bring to this company? So if I'm, in a sea full of people who look just like me, right, and have the same experience of me, we're all bringing very similar things to the table. How much more inclusive, innovative, vibrant, far reaching would we be if I said, okay, this is what I can do, but what can someone else do and what can they bring to the table? Instead of looking for a carbon copy, let's look for people who are complements to what we're already doing. And that's what I teach my entrepreneurs to do when we talk about hiring someone. Don't get someone who's just like you. You don't need to replicate yourself. It might make you feel better, right? Initially, you look in the mirror, but there's nothing wrong with saying, this is my area of strength. These are the areas where I need some support, and finding people to plug in who are really good in those areas to make the whole company better. But that is really looking at it from a place of strength and security and not insecurity. Someone's not coming to take your job. You're bringing someone in to add more value and more culture and more competence and more experience and more reach to the company to make the company grow, which is not a reflection on what you can do. It's just reaching a wider demographic because you have more and greater and better representation.
Yeah, so you bring up a good point earlier about how when an organization is looking at the top 5 schools to attract talent, of course there are talent everywhere, and it's not just
Mm-hmm.
the top 5 schools. And when it comes to diversity, the point of diversity is really to attract talent from various schools and not just the top
Mm-hmm.
5. We can have bright top talent in other schools as well. And
Right.
so it's really getting leaders to shift their minds, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
in a way to make them think broader than their narrow, perspective.
Yeah.
Speaking about mind shifts, of course, you've worked with entrepreneurs, specifically, you know, people of color,
Mm-hmm.
to get their minds to shift in a way that serves them rather than hinders their performance.
Mm-hmm.
What's been your experience?
Yeah. So right now, I'm really centering the needs and the stories of folks of color, right? Under resourced and underrepresented folks in this entrepreneurship space. And I think just in general, as folks living in this country, there's a lot of scarcity mindset, and even more, I feel like, amongst folks of color or under-resourced folks, because we're used to having a lack. But it's that same mindset shift of thinking, instead of focusing on what you don't have, instead of when you're hiring somebody looking at what school they didn't go to, look at what you do have. What skills and what value do you bring to the table? What can you share with the world? There's also this assumption and we have to be perfect, that you got to have, your website all the way together and bang in with, I don't even know if Flash is still a thing, but, it's got to be attractive and have music and all this stuff, right? Like, no, I went to Curacao, before the pandemic last year, most of the businesses don't have websites. They have Facebook pages, right? Then I'm not saying that people need to go and have a Facebook page, but here we really feel like you got to have a website, you got to have this, you got to have that. There's a whole country that's running business without websites for the most part, right? So there's more than one way to do something. So it's really getting all of us to shift that mindset. Instead of thinking what you don't have and what's going to stand in your way, think about what you do have, and then just start taking that action. There's a quote that I have, I'm looking for it on my on this wall over here, but it's clarity comes from action, right? If you're confused about something, it becomes much more clear when you start taking a step, and then you take another, and then you take another, and you learn very quickly what works, what doesn't work, what you like, what you don't like. But if you're sitting there in that space of just thinking the whole time, you're not going to learn anything new, because your situation is not changing for you to apply and, decide what you want to keep and what you don't want to keep.
Yeah, I love that quote. It's about taking massive action in order to create more clarity in your life.
Mm-hmm.
I used to be at one point in my early career so structured and say, this is in order to get a point B, I need to, finish, what I'm doing, on point A. And so it's like, I've always thought that success was linear, but it's not.
It's
And
not.
so, and so it was through trial and error that I learned it the hard way. And I wish I had mentors to guide me through that.
Yeah.
What's your thought on mentorship and finding the right network or the right environment to help us succeed?
Yeah, I think mentorship is extremely important. What can be a challenge is if you don't know someone who is doing it, right? Or thinking about how do you get in relationship with someone to be your mentor. But there's a number of ways to do it. Even if you just start with the free stuff, like finding people who are in business or who are in your space on Instagram or in Facebook, right? Joining those free groups until you get to a point where you can actually hire them to mentor you directly, or reaching out to somebody who's at work, who's a couple levels above you, who really wants to pour into you and help you get to where they are and follow in their footsteps to where they're going. When I started teaching, no, maybe it was law school. I think it was law school. One thing that was really interesting to me, it just blew my mind. So right before we started taking exams. So in law school, you go to class for the semester, and then for the most part, you have one exam. Occasionally you might have a midterm, but your whole class grade is based on this one exam at the end, right? And I was hearing all of these stories of these students getting approved for extra time because they had learning disabilities, right? And there's no knock to that. And I think we all have a lot of stuff going on, but I was so surprised at how many white students were saying, hey, I need some extra time, I've got a learning disability. And they had gotten to this point without having accommodations, right? They were like newly diagnosed, right? And I just thought about that. I was like, that's really interesting. And I understood, why they're doing it, because everyone wants a little extra time on the law school exam, right? But in like the Black community, the Latinx community, communities of color, we weren't doing it. Like, we didn't want to be diagnosed with some kind of a learning disability. Even in elementary school, we get tracked very often, especially if you're an English language learner, right? You get tracked with the special ed kids, the learning challenge kids, right? And then it's really hard to get off of that track. And I understand that. So we've developed this culture of not wanting to ask for help, right? Because we don't want to be seen as being weak or having deficiencies. But in law school, it really struck me. And then also when I started teaching at the community college, that the white community is really not, I'm being general, right? Is really not afraid to ask for help or to say, I need some mentorship, or say, hey, I don't know. There's no shame, it seems like, in that community for going to get the resources that are needed. Whereas I recognize in my own community and other communities that I'm like standing next to, that there's something really, it feels like almost devastating about having to admit that we don't know how to do it, and we don't know how to ask, right? But we just have to get over that feeling of feeling a deficit, because it's not a deficit. Nobody knows everything that they're supposed to do, right? And by being unwilling to ask, we're only holding ourselves back. So we need to get comfortable saying, you know what, this is what I'm working on. I'm not quite sure how to turn this $1,000 into 10,000. I think I need some strategy. I got to find a mentor, ask around to people who have done it, right? Get that support and really be unapologetic about going after it. The other part of it too is that you do have to be careful who you choose to listen to. I talk about my mom all the time. Parents are a really good example, right? Because my mom was of the generation here where, the goal was to work 30 years and then retire. You buy a house, you get married, buy a house, have some children, work for 30 years and then retire. And like, that's the American dream, right? And that's not the path I'm on. Like, definitely not in that order, at least, right? And so when I'm talking to her about my challenges as an entrepreneur, because like you said, it's not linear, it's like a roller coaster, it goes up and goes down, and you just have to stick to it, right? My mom's primary concern is keeping me safe. What is safe in her mind is having a steady job that I'm going to work in for 30 plus years, retire with some, retirement funds, and like, that's it. I've made it, right? So when I'm feeling low as an entrepreneur, my mom is not the one that I need to run to pick me back up, because her initial thought is, let me keep you safe. This looks unsafe. Let me tell you to go back and work for corporate America because that's safe. That's what she knows is safe, right? So it's really important. Huh?
Or I told you so is what my mom.
Yeah, exactly, right? So it's really important to have those mentors. My mom is really great about being supportive in other areas, but me talking to her about entrepreneurship stresses her out. So then that stresses me out, right? So I gotta find someone who has, gone through the steps that I'm going through right now to help pour into me in that way.
So you made a point earlier about sticking to your path. And of course, the show is about purpose. What's your definition of purpose, and how does purpose serve you?
Yeah. So in my opinion, I mean, people can have many different purposes, right? And your purpose is going to be different than mine, or they might be the same, right? But I think it's that thing that you feel like you are really called to do in this world, right? The thing that you love to do. I won't necessarily, people will say the thing that you would do for free, right? And we all got to make a living, right? So don't feel like if you're following your purpose, you can't also earn a living from it. Those two don't have to be mutually exclusive. But the thing that maybe you find yourself doing over and over again. So I mentioned for me, I thought I was going to be a teacher, didn't end up teaching, but then in law school, I started teaching law to high school and middle school kids. And then after that, right after law school, I started teaching exercise classes, which had nothing to do with the law, which was great, right? And then I started teaching adjunct, and I came back to this teaching. So for me, I feel like my purpose, my calling is to teach, right? Is to empower and impart wisdom on other people. And it's not just tied to law, right? Because there's the exercise part of it too. So it's not necessarily the content for me, it's the service of educating and empowering other people. So whatever that purpose is for that individual, and sometimes it gets lost because we have all of these messages from society, from family, from friends telling us what we should and shouldn't do. But that purpose is that thing that ignites you, makes you feel good, the thing that you want to share with the world. And I think it's important for all of us to have that as a part of our daily lives.
Wow, that's so powerful, having you describe it that way. And I hadn't thought of purpose as a plural thing. Like you can have multiple purposes. I've always thought there's one purpose statement for every person, and you just follow that statement, and you'll tweak it throughout time because life changes us, and so therefore we have to change the purpose statement. But hey, we are human beings with dynamic characteristics and interests, and our way of serving others and how we show up, we have different sides to who we are. And so, as you say, you are a trainer, you're also a teacher and a legal expert and a daughter. And so there are different things that make us who we are, and therefore we should have multiple purposes to help
Yeah.
us to make us feel more alive.
Yeah.
So when you're experiencing challenging times, how do you push through those challenging times?
Yeah. So I think that's a really good question. And I just to tie it back to the entrepreneurs, and even just folks going through life, right? I think one of the the biggest myths that I don't know how I fell into it as a kid was that I thought everything was going to get better as an adult, right? That everything was going to be easy as an adult. And once you just get to adulthood, once you get to like 21, that's great. And then once you get to 25, like, okay. And then like 27, like I should have this figured out, right? Like it should be easier. But life just happens, and on the road to entrepreneurship, like I said, it's a roller coaster. It's up and down all the time, and you hope that you have more steady, flow than the high highs and the low lows, right? But that's also just a part of life. And so I think really accepting that there are challenges, there's always going to be something, right? Like, yeah, very rarely do I feel like I have everything covered. So maybe things are going really well in business, but I haven't seen, my friends as frequently as I've wanted to, right? Or I'm like really great and in shape, but then I haven't traveled to see my family in the last like 6 months, right? So it's always kind of I know people don't like the word balance nowadays, but there's always something. You're going to be doing really well, feeling really great in one area, and maybe not as great, need to make other improvements in other areas. So what do I do? I think I stay consistent. So in terms of taking care of my health and well-being, right? That
Mm,
should look the same, no matter whether you're super high and super low, right? If you're really happy, you should still be doing the things to take care of yourself the same way you would if you were feeling low and trying to get back to that steady ground, right? Taking care of yourself. I think also just accepting again that life happens. There are going to be high highs and low lows, and there's nothing that you can do about it because that stuff is out of your control. What you can control is how you respond and how you orient yourself to the world when that happens. So knowing that one of my friends had a baby, and I think her daughter was maybe like 6 months or something like that. So, still in the car seat very often when they would get out. And I just remember saying, goodness, you can't even just run into the store real quick. You got to get the kids out, and it's like an ordeal. And she just looked at me and she said, Asha, everything has a season. I was
mm,
like, huh. And it was in that context that her daughter wasn't going to be that little, and it wasn't going to be that arduous to take them into the store all the time. But everything has a season. You have a season where things are more challenging. You have a season where things are really flowing. You have a season where you're rebuilding, a season where you're planting. That nothing is permanent. Nothing is permanent, right? So getting comfortable with adapting to change. You also said something earlier about, having a purpose statement and, things changing. That is true, right? Not feeling like we have failed if we need to pivot. Look at it like a pivot instead of looking at it like this thing didn't work, right? Even in my own business, I have had many different iterations of what my business looks like. And for a while, I used to think that I was failing because this thing that I thought that I wanted to do or that I did for a year and a half and now I no longer want to do, because I no longer want to do it, that meant that I had failed. But it didn't mean that I had failed. Like you said, we are people, we are dynamic, we are growing, we are changing. Our clientele is changing, the world is changing, there's different opportunities. So why would our output to the world, our gift to the world, our business to the world not also change just as often as we do as people? And I think looking at it like that and learning to accept that we are going to change makes it much easier to deal with the challenges that come our way, because the challenges aren't permanent, right? As soon as we can get ourselves together and keep pushing through them, then they won't be there. We'll push through them.
right. So, of course, this pandemic has taught many people a lot of things. Some have lost their jobs, others have lost their business, and unfortunately, people have lost their loved ones. And
Mm-hmm.
and it's speaking about change and loss and even depression and anxiety. Like we're
Yeah.
in a very interesting time right now, and for many of us, it's something that we've never felt. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so so the feel of it is just, it seems so extreme at times. And
Mhm.
how do you manage through all of those changes and losses? Um,
Yeah,
in how does purpose play into all of that? Do you have
right.
any thoughts on that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been saying a lot lately. I think I've been affected. We've all been affected by the pandemic, right? And some of us have been affected in different ways than in others. But it sounds, I'm not trying to be insensitive at all, but in every situation, there is always a lesson to be learned, right? So even when somebody passes away or you lose a job, there is something that you can take from that situation and look at it in a positive light. So nothing is ever all bad and nothing is ever all good either, right? Like you can have a really successful year and then say, oh man, I didn't spend as much time with my friends as I wanted to, right? Or you can, experience a lot of loss. And then somewhere in there, there's some gift that you can take or some wisdom or some knowledge or some lesson that you can take and, learn from it and do something with it. So I think keeping that in mind and really looking for what it is and just saying, instead of saying, why me? Which is a valid question to ask, but it's not a very useful question to ask, right? Instead of saying, why me? Why did this happen? What am I supposed to learn and how do I move on from here? And it doesn't mean that you don't feel, doesn't mean that you don't grieve, doesn't mean that you don't, cry or get upset or whatever, but it does mean that you let those feelings come through you, pass through you, and you move forward to see what is the next step. Because what's the alternative? Being stuck emotionally, being stuck mentally, and maybe being stuck physically, right? We don't want that. So we got to go through those periods of discomfort. I'm in couple different classes on like just understanding energy and mindset and things like that, and one of the instructors was saying, we, especially in the Western world, have this idea that these negative emotions are bad, right? We call them negative emotions: anger, sadness, fear. She's like, they're not bad. Like emotions aren't bad, they are what they are. Just use them as information to
Right.
decide how you're going to move forward. It's feedback that something may have been uncomfortable, and discomfort isn't bad, but now use it as information to decide how you're going to move forward and what you're going to do next. So a lot of that is about the perspective. And there are also, I don't want to dismiss any concerns about people needing to make money, needing to find housing. Those are very real, tangible concerns that need to be addressed. I think also being innovative and when you need to do something, right? Like, how can I make money? I was just listening to a podcast this morning, with people who have all these different side hustles, these blogs, right? Nowadays, you could probably run a blog from your cell phone. Everybody has a cell phone with a data plan, writing about an experience, but being intentional, using that to, and knowing that it's going to take some time to grow. You can make money from the ads, you could sell products, right? There's that innovation and looking at ourselves as the product, looking at ourselves as the I probably shouldn't say product because that means we're like being bought and sold, but we are the brains, right? It's not, if we can get to a point where we are realizing that we don't always need an employer to help us make a living, how can we make a living for ourselves? And maybe we have a full-time job also or a part-time job working for somebody else, but how, like, what can you bring to the table that you can make some money off of without needing somebody else to help you with that? And that's a mindset shift. That's because
Yeah.
that is not what we're taught in school here. We're taught to go to school, go to college, get a good job, work forever, maybe enjoy it for a few years and then, die, right? Like that's all we're taught. We're not taught to be innovative and
Yeah.
creative and that there's a way to step outside the system and to do it for yourself. But I think that is the key.
Yeah. I think technology has really advanced people's lives. I mean, if used correctly and appropriately, that, it can help
Hmm.
people grow their businesses, enhance their lives, and even in my case, reach people from across the world. Um,
Hmm.
Podcast and having them on my show. And so I think
Right.
it's great that we're continuing to evolve, not just as humans, but also that we have systems and processes in place that's helping us achieve the kinds of goals that we're wanting for ourselves.
Hmm.
There was so much that you said in the last 2-3 minutes that I love it, that I couldn't capture it all. But you mentioned about of course, mindset shift and and how all of that really is about perspective. And
Mm-hmm.
so what I took from your response to my initial question is, how do people manage their change, is that it's really about looking at the good things, like having a positive
Mm-hmm.
and being grateful about the things that happen to you, instead of saying, why me. It's saying, what did this teach me, and
Right.
what I learned from it, and
Mm-hmm.
in order to grow, because I need to grow as a human being. And
Right.
so all of that was just so amazing. And I think that I don't know if there's any scientific data research, I'm sure there is, that supports the fact that as human beings, we're just more prone to the negative things, like
Mm-hmm.
are more drawn to
Yeah.
fear and anxiety, depression.
Right. Yep. We
And-
got there is actually data because I read the book called Hardwiring Happiness. I think that's what it was called. And so there was a period of time a couple years ago where I was like, I'm gonna make myself happy. And it was probably right around the time that I turned, was it 35, when like right before my 35th birthday, and read this book and was like, yeah. And I was really like, I was just genuinely elated with life. It didn't mean that there weren't challenges and things that were, the obstacles that I had to overcome, but it was really the mindset. It was really about being appreciative in the moment for whatever it was, whether I'm, eating a taco. I love tacos. I'm so appreciative that I can have this taco right now. Laying in my bed, I am so appreciative that I have covers to put over me tonight, right? Just being appreciative in those moments. And so the, the scientific data behind it is that hundreds of thousands of years ago, when we didn't have all of this structure around us to protect us, we needed to remember those negative experiences because they kept us alive. So we needed to remember that plant that we ate and got sick from, more than we needed to remember the plant that we ate and made us feel good, because if we got sick from it, we could die, right? And so our brains imprint on us 4 times as much the negative experiences, because we are trying to keep ourselves safe from experiencing and alive from experiencing those negative experiences again, right? Where like we don't need to be happy to survive, but we need to not be dead, right? that's kind of how it comes with these negative experiences. So for every one negative experience, you need like 4 or 5 positive experience to counteract that negative impression that it leaves on your brain. Also, just with like neuropsychology, our brains are hardwired to keep us safe. They're things that we automate. So maybe every morning, every morning I get up and I brush my teeth and wash my face. Like I don't even think about it. I just brush my teeth and wash it. It's on autopilot. My brain doesn't have to think about it. I developed that habit years ago. And so because it's on autopilot and I'm not thinking about it, my brain is saving energy, right? So those things, those thoughts that we have automated keep us safe. And it's really hard to change those thoughts because it takes more energy to change them than it does to just stick with that path. So there is a lot of actually science behind why negativity imprints on us so much more to keep us alive, and also why it's really hard to say, I'm going to go to the gym every day for a month. And you say it and you mean it, but you don't do it because, now you're trying to rewire this neural connection that you have made, and it takes energy and really intentionality behind it so that you can make a new neural pathway, they call it. So there's science behind it.
So you mentioned about intentions, and I want to dig a little on that concept of intention, and how that plays into purpose. So
Mhm.
for me, when I launched this podcast, the intent was to make an impact in people's lives, to help them
Mhm.
move away from this negative state of mind, either if they're experiencing depression or anxiety or these negative mental states, and
Mhm.
into a positive state of mind. So essentially shifting their mindset so they can see the positive things in life and
Mhm.
grateful for what they have, and create joy and peace and love, which
Right.
the Hawkins scale, joy, peace, and love, is like, it's really high up there. It's an energy scale, right? Speaking of,
Right.
and so, and it takes work for people to live more intentional. And so
Mhm.
how can people, aside from taking some time to reflect or meditate, to be more intentional about our behaviors and actions and the thoughts that we want to have it processed inside our minds, what other resources or tools do you think we could utilize to be more to be more intentional about our behaviors and our thoughts?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think practicing gratitude or appreciation in the moment helps because it slows you down to think about what you're doing. So, and another word for that is just being mindful, right? But sometimes it's hard to be mindful when you're on autopilot and you're moving from place to place. But I think slowing down enough to just kind of evaluate where you are will allow you to understand what you're feeling and what's going on. So maybe that requires setting reminders every hour. A little bell goes off and it's like your mindfulness reminder. Just let me just check in with myself. I think that can be really helpful. But then it's like, okay, we'll check in for what? So maybe before that, I really like to journal and to write stuff down. And so I'm always writing, what are my business goals? What are my life goals? What do I want to do? Where do I want to travel to? What happened to me that day? Some ideas and things that are floating around in my head. And I really think that the process of writing, not typing, but actually writing with pen and paper or pencil and paper really allows us to process different things. And so maybe you ask yourself, who do I want to be and what do I want to do? Right. And I'm not talking about like, I want to be the CEO of some company, maybe, right? But that's not really like who you are. That's something that's a title that you carry, right? But who do I want to be? I want to be a loving person who changes the world through making education accessible, so that folks can, create economic and financial stability. That's who I want to be. That has nothing to do with what hat I wear to do that, right? So then when you figure that out, okay, now how do I want to be? How is this person that is changing the world through education? How are they acting? Right? They are acting in kindness to their neighbor. They are not rushing, right? And I think just thinking about where you want to be as a person and what it's going to take to get there, and what are those daily practices that you can do. Not huge things like maybe it requires you to go back to school, but that's not what I'm talking about, right? It's like just, I want to be kind. I want to speak words of life into my neighbor. I want to speak words of life into my children. I want to be that person. And I think that helps us with those intentions because, they say once you have your goals, you can ask yourself, is this thing that I'm doing getting me further to my goals, or is it taking me away? And there really isn't any in between, right? So if I want to be, I don't know, I want to be a triathlete, right? Is this donut that I'm about to eat, and I'm not talking about like body shaming people or like, controlling someone's food, but is this donut that I'm about to eat going to make me stronger when I go and ride 20 miles on my bike tomorrow? Maybe it will because I need some calories, right? And maybe it won't because it's too much sugar. My body can't do anything useful with the sugar. And I'm not judging it, but just being able to ask, is this thing, this task that I'm doing, this job that I have, this trip that I'm taking, this money that I'm spending, taking me closer to my goals, or, pulling me further away? I think once you evaluate it through that lens, then you start to be more intentional, because when you get serious about your goals and when you understand that you can reach them, you get more committed and everything starts to line up. But if you haven't written them down, if you don't know where you're going, who you want to be, what you want it to look like, you're not really being mindful and intentional with your living.
Right. That's amazing. That reminds me, I took a mindfulness class my senior year of college, and
Uh-huh.
a ton about mindfulness, which was, it was only a 2 credit course, and I needed to get 2 credits in order to graduate. And so I'm like, I'll take this something. I'll take some easy class to pass.
Right.
And honestly, it was one of the toughest class I've ever had.
I
Because
bet.
the practice was not there for me. The mindfulness was a new concept for me. And it actually takes a lot of energy and work to really be mindful when you don't
Yeah.
know what mindfulness is. And so
Right.
our final exam was just to simply meditate for 2 hours. And
Uh-huh.
in
Wow.
thoughts, just sit, just meditate, just and about half the class fell asleep. I don't
Right.
know what to think of that. I don't know what the professor thought of that, but I was the other half that didn't. Um, but my mind was just all over the place, and so
Mm-hmm.
I need to be more mindful, I think,
Right.
especially during this time when things are kind of scary and there's a virus
Mm-hmm.
going on, and people losing their jobs, and so it's and because of that they're taking their anger out on people, and so I need to be, I need to practice that. It needs to be
Mm-hmm.
almost like a daily habit for me. So thanks for the
Yeah.
reminder.
Of course. I mean, I'm on my own
Yeah.
meditation journey too, right? And I was in the same boat where I was like, I kept thinking, I'm doing it wrong. I can't quiet these thoughts because, conventional stuff or like internet search would be like, you got to get your mind quiet, right? And I'm working with someone to help me through meditation. They're like, no, you don't have to. You want to get to the point where you can just observe the thoughts and not judge them.
Mm,
But, clearing your mind of thoughts, maybe that's like 15, 20 years down the line, maybe not that far, I don't know, but
mm,
like that's not necessarily the goal. It's just to sit and to be still, because in stillness you can actually observe them. So it doesn't mean that you're not having these thoughts when you're not meditating. It's just when you're quiet enough to pay attention to them, now you know what they are,
right.
right? And so you can pull them out, you can, dissect them, you can reframe them. But if we don't ever get quiet with ourselves, we're still moving through life. The thoughts are still happening, but we are not really in tune with what's actually guiding us,
Mm,
propelling us forward or keeping us back because we're not getting quiet enough to listen. So I think that's really important.
that's amazing. Um, who inspires you, or what inspires you to continue doing the work you're doing?
Yeah. Um, geez, I would say so. I come from a line of civil rights pioneers. My grandfather he lived in Jackson, Mississippi, and worked with Medgar Evers and Dr. Martin Luther King, and is responsible for filing a couple of lawsuits to desegregate Jackson County public schools, and also filed a lawsuit to enforce the desegregation policies on public transportation facilities across the nation, like trains, planes, automobiles, that kind of thing, right? So and he was really big on getting people to vote. And he, with his three kids, my mom and my auntie and my uncle, really made sure that they knew that they needed to get an education, right? Because education was the ticket out. And then my mom made her own history in terms of being the first Black woman to enroll in the University of Mississippi. Back in 1965, I think it was, the height of the civil rights movement. And then she has or had a career in education where she was just touching people's lives. And it always used to amaze me as a kid because I was around, she was a middle school principal at the same time when I was in middle school, and I played sports, and we lived in the same school district that she was a principal in. And I always used to go up to these kids and be like, what school do you go to? And they'd be like, Cedar Park Middle School. I'm like, oh, well, do you like your principal? I would try and trick people into saying something, not nice about my mom. So I could be like, that's my mom. Why are you talking about her? But I could never get anybody to say that, which I'm glad, right? Like, what kind of kid does that, right? Try to, start something. But it just always impressed me that because I didn't know very many principals that people really loved to be around. They're just kind of like the authority figure there. They don't talk to the kids as much, but all of these students really loved my mom. And she'd been at it for so long that they would graduate and then have their own families. They would come back and visit her. And I just saw this impact, this like exponential impact that she had on these people who I had no idea who they were. And she remembered almost every student's name, remembered their stories, their families, all of that stuff. And I think just seeing how she was able to touch people just with kindness. She was running the school, but it's not like, maybe she went above and beyond for certain individual students, but just by being a good person who led with love, she was able to impact so many people. So I think it's not always that challenging. Like, I don't have these aspirations to, have $1 million, well, maybe I do, $1 million law firm. Like, maybe that's not a bad aspiration, but I'm not thinking about it in terms of just the numbers, but in terms of impact by just being who I am and encouraging those folks around me. Like, because then you turn it around, and I might not even ever know about it. And I don't do it to think like, oh, I want people to come around and tell me, but just to help someone else make a difference in someone else's life. So
Yeah, that's great. I mean, of course, impact is such a huge value to people's lives. At the end of the day, um, when we're on our deathbed, we don't talk about, how much money we have. We're talking about
Right.
how much impact that we made in people's lives and the
Right.
relationships that we
Absolutely.
made along the way. And so it's great that you're on this mission and you know what you want and you're purpose driven and you have your stuff figured out. And I'm really proud of you.
Thank you.
And I'm so happy that you're now part of a community of purpose driven people who are doing great work in their own communities, and continue to make that impact in people's lives and being that positive force of change for for good in
Hmm.
our society. So thank you for your existence.
Thank you.
I know we're about that time. I've got two last questions here.
Hmm.
The next question is, what advice would you give to the listeners on the show?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, I'm on this mission right now to help people turn their businesses and their side hustles and the things that they do for hobbies to make them more efficient in terms of building security and wealth for them as individuals, right? So whether you have a blog on the side or you sell, food cupcakes on the side or whatever it is, or you're starting your full-time thing, really learn the business side of being in business and don't hesitate to do something that's just going to make you an extra $300 a month, because that can really change your future, putting away $300 extra a month. So looking at what we're already doing and learning how to use it efficiently. The tax code in this country rewards business owners. And it doesn't mean that you have to do anything different than what you were doing as a solo, but I want you to have that knowledge so you can decide what to do with the money as it comes in. I want you to learn how to reduce your tax liability. I want you to learn how to put money away for the future. I want you to learn how to build a business and leave a legacy, right? And not just a legacy like when you pass away and leave it for somebody else, but what about, in right after college, a couple friends of mine were getting married, and their parents were able to give them the down payment for the house right away, right? And the dad of the wife had his own company and had been wildly successful. Like, what about being able to do that for our friends and family now? So there aren't any secrets. It's just we need to know who to talk to, how to get that information, how to hear it in a way that we understand and know that we too can do that same thing, because there's nothing stopping us but the knowledge and the know-how, right? Because we've got really good work ethic. People of color, immigrants, we've got really good work ethic, right? So now how do we do the same thing that we're already doing and just maximize its potential, make it a little bit more efficient, right? That's what I want folks to really to look at.
That's incredible. And you're so right on, people who didn't have much growing up, are truly hard workers who wants the best for them and their family. They'll do what
Right.
they can to survive and thrive. My last question here is, where can people find you and your work should they choose to connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I hang out the most on Instagram, and my handle on Instagram is Asha Wilkerson, ESQ. And if you want to find out more about my membership community for entrepreneurs, where I'm giving you business advice, legal education, and financial resources, then visit my website, thewilkersonlawoffice.com. And don't hesitate. There's a spot there where you can leave me a video message, an audio message, a text. Don't hesitate to reach out, and I will answer your question if I can. And if not, I'll connect you with the resources to help you get to where you're trying to go.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing your information with us. Folks, well, you hear from the gal herself. If you want to connect with her, definitely reach out and reference where you found her. Thank you so much, Asha.
Thank you.